The night was cold and the streets were silent. She walked slowly, her arms weak, carrying a child who pressed his face against her shoulder. The child was hungry, his body small and shaking, and she had no food left. Her feet dragged along the dusty path, and her eyes searched for light, for hope, for mercy. She reached the first door and knocked. The door opened. A tall alien woman looked down at her. The mother begged softly, "Please, just a little food for my child." The woman's eyes turned hard. The door slammed shut without a word. She held her child tighter, whispered to calm him, and moved to the second door. This time an old alien man answered. His face showed no pity, only disgust. "Go away," he said coldly. And the door closed, her legs shook. But she forced herself to continue. Third door, fourth door, fifth door. Each one slammed in her face. Her child cried softly, his small voice breaking in the cold air. She wiped his tears with trembling hands, but her own tears fell silently. The sixth door opened with a bright light inside. A family sat at a table filled with food. She begged again, her voice shaking. "Please, he has not eaten in days." The father of the family stood, walked to the door, and closed it slowly, his eyes never softening, one door after another. She faced rejection by the 10th door. Her strength was gone. She leaned against the wall, her breathing heavy, her eyes blurry. Her child whispered weakly, "Mama, food." And her heart broke deeper than any wound. The 11th door opened. A young alien girl looked out curiously. For a moment, the girl's eyes softened, but a sharp voice from inside shouted, "Close it!" The door slammed and the chance was gone. Her hope faded like smoke in the night. The 12th door stood in front of her. She lifted her hand with difficulty. Her knuckles barely knocking, the door opened, and the face behind it was cruel. "Leave, you shame," he hissed, and shut the door with force. Her knees gave way and she fell to the ground. The child cried louder now, hungry, scared, weak. She held him close, her own lips dry, her own stomach empty. Her eyes stared at the dark sky, and she whispered, "Is this how it ends?" The street was long, and the wind carried dust and silence. Her body told her to stop, to give up, but her heart whispered one last chance. There was one more door ahead, the 13th. It was small, quiet, and unlike the others, no noise came from inside. Her child's hand touched her cheek as if asking her to try again. With the last of her strength, she stood, her legs shaking like broken branches. She walked slowly to the 13th door, her hand reaching out. She knocked, the sound weak but clear in the silence. The door creaked open and a face appeared in the light. It was not her kind, it was different. Two eyes stared at her with curiosity. Not anger, not disgust, it was a human. For the first time that night, the door did not slam. The human looked at her, then at her child. The silence was heavy. The moment stretched long, her heart beat fast. Waiting, hoping, fearing. Would this door be like the others, or would it be different? 12 doors had given her nothing but pain. The 13th now held her fate, and for the first time, she saw something new in those eyes. Something that looked like mercy. The human stood in the doorway. His hand resting on the frame, he did not speak at once. His eyes moved from the tired mother to the fragile child clinging to her shoulder. The mother lowered her head, afraid that this door too would close with a loud slam. Her lips parted and she whispered, "Please, just one piece of bread, just something for my child." The human tilted his head, his expression unreadable. He had seen beggars before, travelers lost in the markets, smugglers pretending to be poor, but this was different. There was no deception in her voice, only pain and hunger. The child's small hand reached out weakly, and the human's heart tightened in his chest. He should have sent her away like the others. He knew the rules of this settlement. Aliens did not trust strangers, and humans were warned never to invite trouble inside. But something in him refused to follow the cold law of rejection. His people had once known hunger too. His ancestors had begged for survival under skies filled with war. The silence stretched. The woman's knees buckled and she nearly fell. The human reached out without thinking and caught her arm. Her skin was cold, her body trembling, the weight of exhaustion heavy on her. For the first time that night, instead of a door slamming, a hand held her up. "Come in," he said finally. His voice firm but gentle. She looked at him in shock. Unable to believe the words, the child's eyes widened as the door opened wider. Showing the warmth of light inside, the human stepped aside. Giving them space to enter, she hesitated. fear whispering that this might be a trick. But the hunger in her child's cry pushed her forward. She crossed the threshold slowly, her heart beating fast. The human closed the door behind them, and for the first time in hours, no cold wind bit at her skin. The small house smelled of warmth, firewood, bread, and something cooking in a pot. Her eyes filled with tears at the sight of food, though she tried to hide them. The human walked to the kitchen, picked up a piece of bread, and placed it in the child's tiny hands. The child ate quickly, crumbs falling down his cheeks, his small body shaking with relief. The mother covered her mouth, unable to hold back her sobs. She had begged at 12 doors, but only here at the 13th. Had Mercy answered, the human gave her water. His eyes never leaving her face, she drank slowly, her body trembling with both weakness and gratitude. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. His voice breaking the silence, she hesitated, then spoke softly. Her voice rough. "Lyra." The human nodded, his eyes softening. "I am Daniel." The names hung in the air like a fragile bridge between two worlds. For a long time, neither spoke more. Lyra watched her child eat as if this moment was only a dream. Daniel watched her with curiosity, wondering what had brought her here. What kind of world would let 12 doors slam against a mother and her child? He did not ask yet, for he knew the wound was fresh. As the fire crackled, Lyra whispered, "Why did you help me? Why did you not close the door like the others?" Daniel looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. "My people know hunger," he said at last, his voice low. "We know what it means to be refused when you are dying inside." His words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than stone. Lyra lowered her head, unable to speak, her tears falling silently. Daniel turned back to the fire, his mind already restless. He had broken an unspoken rule of the settlement, and he knew it. Helping her was an act of defiance, one that might bring whispers, one that might bring danger. But as he looked at the small child, asleep now with breadcrumbs on his lips, Daniel knew he would not regret it, for mercy was not weakness. Mercy was strength that others had forgotten, and though he did not yet know it, opening the 13th door that night would change both their lives forever. The small room was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Lyra sat on the floor, her child resting against her lap. Finally full enough to sleep, her eyes still carried fear, as if any moment the human might change his mind and cast them out. But Daniel sat across from her, arms folded, his gaze steady. He studied her carefully, not with cruelty but with questions hidden behind his eyes. She noticed the lines on his face, the weariness of someone who had seen hardship. He was not like the others who had slammed their doors with cold hearts. He seemed shaped by something different, something that made him hesitate before turning anyone away. "Tell me," Daniel said quietly, "why were you out there, going door to door?" His voice was calm, but the question was sharp. Lyra lowered her head, shame burning her throat. Her words came slowly. "We had nothing left, no food, no home. No one to turn to." She stopped, her chest heavy. She feared telling too much, for trust was a dangerous thing. But Daniel's eyes did not look away. They did not carry judgment, only patience, so she whispered more. "Every door I knocked, they treated me like dirt. Like I was less than nothing." Daniel leaned back, his jaw tightening. He had expected something like this, but hearing it in her voice made it cut deeper. The settlement was cruel, the people selfish. He had seen it before. Fear turned into hatred, and hatred turned into silence when mercy was needed most. He rose from his chair and paced near the window. The street outside was quiet, but he could still picture the faces of those who had slammed doors on her. In his heart, anger burned, not only for her suffering, but for the sickness of a community that had forgotten what it meant to care. He turned back to her, his decision weighing heavier each second. "You can stay here tonight," Daniel said firmly. Lyra looked up in shock, her lips parting as if she had not heard correctly. Her child stirred, making a small sound in his sleep. Daniel continued, "Tomorrow, we will find a way for you to be safe, but tonight, you will not sleep on the streets." Her tears came again. Silent but endless, she wanted to thank him, but the words would not come. Daniel did not demand thanks, his voice softened instead. "Your child should never know the taste of hunger like this." He walked back to the fire, tossing another piece of wood in, watching the sparks rise like fleeting stars. The hours passed slowly, the weight of silence sitting between them. Lyra tried to rest, but each sound outside made her flinch. She knew that if the others discovered she was in a human's home, whispers would spread and whispers would soon become danger. Daniel saw her fear, and though he did not speak it, he shared the same concern. At last, when the child was deep in sleep, Lyra asked softly, "Why did you do this for us? Why risk anger from your people?" Daniel sat down again, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes staring into the flames. "My people were not always strong," he said slowly. "There was a time when we were broken, starving, dying, and no one came to help us." His voice lowered, carrying the weight of memory not his own but carried through generations. "We survived because a few chose mercy, because some remembered that hunger makes us the same." He turned his eyes to hers, steady and unflinching. "I will not be the one to turn away when I see it in another's eyes." The firelight reflected in his gaze, and for the first time, Lyra saw not just kindness but conviction. Her chest tightened, not from fear but from something she had not felt in years. "Hope." She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Then you are different from them." Daniel gave no answer, but inside he knew the truth. He was different, and being different in this place was dangerous. As the night grew deeper, the air outside grew restless. Shadows moved along the street. Doors opened and shut quietly, whispers rising like smoke the neighbors had noticed. And curiosity was turning into suspicion. Daniel's decision had already begun to ripple beyond his walls. But in that small house where a human chose mercy over fear, something had already changed. The 13th door had opened not only to give food and shelter, but to ignite a bond that neither of them could yet understand. For Lyra and her child, it was the first step toward survival. For Daniel, it was the first step toward defiance, and maybe something greater. The night passed slowly, but inside the human's home there was warmth. Lyra sat near the fire, her child sleeping under a blanket that smelled of smoke and safety. For the first time in many days, her heart did not beat only with fear, but even as comfort touched her, shadows of doubt remained heavy. Daniel moved quietly through the small house, checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked. His face was calm, but inside his chest there was a storm. He had broken an unspoken law. He had chosen to open his door to someone the others had rejected, and he knew the settlement was not blind. Whispers would already be crawling across the street like insects in the night. Lyra watched him, unsure if she should thank him again or remain silent. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "You risk much for us." Daniel shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the window. "Risk is less important than doing what is right." She lowered her gaze, his words settling in her chest like a strange weight. Heavy, but not painful. The child stirred in his sleep, and Lyra brushed her hand gently across his cheek. Daniel saw the gesture, and for the first time that night he smiled faintly. "You are strong," he said, surprising her. "Most would have given up after the first door. But you knocked 12 times. Her lips trembled, and tears touched her eyes again. "I did not knock for myself. Only for him." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with understanding. Daniel returned to the fire, adding more wood, the flames rising higher. Lyra's eyes followed him, and she whispered, "Why do the others close their hearts so quickly?" Daniel's jaw tightened, and his answer came sharp. "Because fear is easier than mercy." She did not argue, because she had seen it in every slammed door. Fear had made them cruel. Fear had turned her into an outcast. But Daniel's words gave her something new to hold on to, that not all hearts had turned to stone. Hours passed, and at last she rested, her head leaning against the wall. Daniel sat awake, his mind restless. He thought of his ancestors, of the stories told by his grandmother, of wars fought, of hunger endured, of how humans had once survived not because of strength but because of compassion, shared in secret places. Tonight he felt as though those stories had come alive again. Inside his own walls by morning, the light slipped in through the cracks of the wooden shutters. Lyra woke to find bread and a bowl of broth set beside her. Her child ate eagerly, his eyes brighter than they had been in days. She looked up at Daniel, who stood nearby, his expression calm but unreadable. "You cannot stay long," he said at last. His tone steady, her chest tightened with fear. But he continued, "Not because I do not want you here, but because they will notice." He gestured toward the window, toward the street where neighbors were already walking, their heads turning, their whispers soft but sharp. Lyra understood, and dread filled her bones. Still, she could not stop herself from asking, "Then why let us in at all?" Daniel turned his gaze on her, his voice low. Because I would rather stand against them than live knowing I turned away a mother and child. The words cut through her like fire, and for the first time she believed that he meant them. It was not pity that moved him. It was conviction. The day moved slowly, and outside the house the whispers grew. Neighbors walked slower near Daniel's home, their eyes lingering on the door. Some shook their heads, others muttered darkly. Suspicion was growing, and suspicion always turned into something worse. Inside, however, there was a fragile peace. Lyra cleaned the space quietly. Not because she was asked, but because her hands needed to show gratitude. Daniel watched but said nothing. Every action she took reminded him that she was not a burden but a guest who carried dignity even in her weakness. That evening, as the fire burned again, Daniel finally spoke. If you stay, you must be ready for what will come. Lyra's eyes met his, fear flickering, but she nodded. She had faced rejection 12 times. She had faced death in the cold street. She would not turn away from the one door that gave her mercy. Outside, the sky darkened and the voices of the settlement grew sharper. They were no longer whispers, they were questions. They were warnings. Daniel listened, his jaw hardening, and Lyra understood that his shelter was no longer only about food and warmth. It was about defiance, about standing against fear. The 13th door had opened, but it had not only given her safety, it had set fire to the silence of a community, and soon that fire would test them both. The fire burned low that night, casting soft orange light across the small room. Lyra sat close to her child, who now slept with a full belly. His small hands curled gently against the blanket. Her eyes kept moving to Daniel, who sat opposite her, his gaze fixed on the flames as though they held answers to questions he could not ask. The silence between them was heavy, not empty, but filled with things unsaid. Lyra broke the silence first, her voice trembling. Why do you speak of mercy as if it is a weapon? Daniel did not look at her at once. His jaw tightened, his eyes still watching the fire. Because it is, he said finally. Mercy is what kept my people alive when everything else was broken. His words carried a weight she could not understand yet. She leaned forward slightly, curiosity rising. Tell me. Daniel's lips pressed together, as if fighting with himself, but at last he nodded. When I was a boy, my grandmother told me stories, he began, his tone softer than she had heard before. Stories of the old world when humans were starving, when war stripped the land bare, when families begged at doors much like you did last night. His eyes lifted then, meeting hers with a steady fire. She said those who slammed their doors survived for a season, but they were remembered with shame. Those who opened their doors, those who shared their last crumbs, they were remembered as the reason humanity lived. Lyra felt the words strike her heart. For they mirrored her own suffering. She whispered, almost to herself, So you helped me because of old stories? Daniel shook his head slowly. No, I helped you because I saw my grandmother's eyes in your child's. Because hunger has no species, no race. It is the same pain for all. His voice grew quiet but firm. And I will not let fear make me blind. Lyra lowered her gaze, tears threatening again. For so long she had been seen as nothing more than a burden. But here, in this human's words, she felt something she had forgotten. Worth. She whispered. No one else listened, no one cared. Not even those of my own kind, Daniel answered sharply. Then they have forgotten what it means to be alive. The child stirred and Lyra stroked his hair gently. Her heart aching but steadier now, she dared to ask. Do you not fear what they will do to you if they find out? Daniel's jaw tightened again, his shoulders stiff. I do, he admitted. But I fear something else more. I fear becoming like them, shutting my door on the helpless. The room fell into silence again. But this time it was not heavy, it was alive. Lyra studied him, her mind filled with questions, but her heart finally calmer. This human was strange. He carried pain not of this world. Yet it made him stronger, not weaker. She felt a fragile bond forming, something fragile but real outside. The whispers had turned into open conversations. Neighbors gathered near the well, pointing toward Daniel's home. Some muttered about betrayal, others about danger. But inside, the fire's glow drew two strangers closer together. Daniel offered her another piece of bread, not out of duty but out of quiet care. Lyra accepted, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you, she whispered. His eyes softened. Do not thank me for what should always be given. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. something she thought she had lost long ago. The night stretched on, and though danger was close, a different kind of warmth filled the small house. Lyra had found more than food. She had found someone who saw her as more than a beggar. Daniel had found more than guests. He had found a reason to stand firm against a community that had forgotten compassion. Neither spoke it aloud, but both knew. The 13th door was no accident. It was fate. The fire flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and somewhere beyond the settlement, beyond the whispers and fear, a new story was being born. A story of mercy shared across species, of hunger met with kindness. And though neither could see the full shape of it yet, they both felt it. Their lives had changed forever. The next day began with uneasy quiet. Lyra stood by the small window, holding her child close as she watched the street outside. Groups of neighbors walked slowly, their heads turning toward Daniel's house, their voices low but sharp, though she could not hear every word. She could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing against the walls. Daniel noticed too, his face hardening as he pulled the shutters closed. "They have seen you here," he said quietly. "The whispers will grow." Lyra's hands tightened around her child. Fear returning to her chest, she asked in a broken voice, "Will they come for us?" Daniel did not answer at once, his jaw working as if grinding against stone. Finally, he said, "They will not forgive what I have done. Opening my door to you was an act they call betrayal." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "Then I have doomed you." Daniel turned sharply, his voice steady. "No, you did nothing wrong. Their cruelty is the sin, not your hunger." But outside, the whispers were already shaping into threats. Two men spoke near the well, loud enough for Daniel to hear through the window. Humans should know their place. "He has broken the order. He must be taught," one spat. Another muttered, "That woman is cursed. Her child will bring ruin. And he shelters them." Lyra stepped back from the window, her breath shaking. She had seen this before. Rejection was cruel, but anger was worse, she whispered. "They will not stop with words. They will bring fire." Daniel's hand tightened around the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Then let them come. I will not throw you to them." The day dragged on, heavy with waiting. Every knock on the neighbors' doors, every shuffle of feet outside made Lyra flinch. Her child clung to her dress. Sensing the fear, though too young to understand it, Daniel moved like a restless shadow, his steps firm, his eyes scanning the windows. As night returned, the settlement grew louder. From the dark streets came voices, not whispers but chants. "They do not belong," one shouted. "Throw them out," another added. The sound made the walls tremble, made Lyra's heart sink deeper into despair. Daniel lit the fire higher, the glow filling the house. He handed Lyra a knife, small but sharp, his voice calm but firm. "If they break through, you defend yourself?" "You defend your child." Her hands shook as she took it. Staring at the blade, she had never wanted to fight, only to survive. The chants grew closer, footsteps gathering outside. The shadows of many figures flickered against the walls, their voices sharp like knives. Lyra held her child close, whispering prayers from her world. Daniel stood at the door, his back straight, his eyes hard. He remembered his grandmother's stories again, of humans who had stood when all others bowed. He had thought those stories belonged to the past, but now he felt them burn in his blood. Turning his head slightly, he said to Lyra, "Do not fear. You knocked on the 13th door, and I will not let it close." Her tears spilled silently, hope and terror mixing inside her chest. The voices outside grew louder. Fists pounded on the door. "Open, human," they shouted. "Send them out, or we will burn you with them." Daniel did not move. His voice cut through the noise. "You will not have them." The silence after his words was sharp. Like the moment before lightning strikes, Lyra trembled, her child whimpering against her shoulder. She feared this night would end in flames, in screams, in loss. But as she looked at Daniel standing firm, one man against many, she felt something different too for the first time. She saw what mercy truly was. It was not only food, not only shelter, it was the courage to stand. Outside, the crowd roared, anger spilling into the night. Inside, the fire glowed brighter, shadows dancing like warriors on the wall. The 13th door had not just opened, it had drawn a line between fear and mercy, between cruelty and hope, and soon that line would be tested by fire. The pounding on the door grew louder, shaking the wooden frame. Lyra pressed her child close, her body trembling, her eyes fixed on Daniel, who stood like a wall between them and the angry crowd. Outside, voices rose like a storm filled with hatred and fear. "Send them out," someone shouted. "They will bring ruin. They do not belong." Daniel's hand rested firmly on the door. His jaw tight, he turned his head slightly toward Lyra. His voice calm, though his eyes burned with fire. "Stay behind me no matter what happens," he said. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only a silent nod as tears traced down her face. The door rattled again as fists struck harder. Finally, Daniel pulled it open, not in surrender, but in defiance. The crowd staggered back in surprise, their angry faces lit by the firelight spilling from inside. Daniel stepped into the doorway, tall, unyielding, his shadow stretching long across the ground. "You will not take them," his voice thundered. Carrying across the crowd, murmurs broke out, some shocked by his boldness, others angrier than before. "They are cursed," one shouted. "She begged at our doors, we refused." "And you dare protect her?" Daniel's eyes blazed. "Yes, I dare, because refusing mercy makes you weak. Not strong." The words struck them like stones. But anger still boiled. One man pushed forward, his hand raised as if to strike. Daniel did not move, his voice steady. "Touch them, and you will know what it means to stand against a human." The crowd hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. Behind him, Lyra whispered to her child, her heart pounding. She thought this would be the end, that no kindness could stand against so many. But as Daniel's words cut through the night, something shifted. Not all faces in the crowd were filled with hate. Some carried doubt, some carried shame. An older woman in the crowd lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "We all saw her. We all turned her away." Her words carried weight, spreading like cracks through stone. Others began to murmur, guilt mixing with anger. Daniel's eyes swept across them, his voice sharper. 12 doors closed, but this one opened. Ask yourselves what that means. The silence that followed was deep, broken only by the crackle of torches in the night. Some lowered their arms uneasy, others still glared. But their strength was fading, for mercy had shown itself stronger than fear. At last the crowd began to break, one by one turning away, their whispers no longer sharp, but heavy with shame. Soon only a few remained, their anger still hot, but even they did not step forward. For Daniel's stand had planted doubt in their hearts, and doubt is the enemy of cruelty. When the street grew empty, Daniel closed the door slowly. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her child clutched tightly, sobbing into his hair. Daniel stood still for a long moment, his chest rising with heavy breaths, his hands trembling though his face remained firm. Finally he turned, his eyes softening as he looked at them. "You are safe now," he said quietly. Lyra lifted her face, her tears shining in the firelight. Why do this when it could cost you everything?" Daniel knelt beside her, his voice steady. "Because humanity was not built on fear, it was built on mercy, and I will not forget that." His words struck deeper than any blade, filling her with a warmth she thought she would never feel again. The child looked up, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, we are safe." Lyra hugged him close, her heart overflowing. She looked at Daniel with new eyes, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as something rare, something unbreakable. The 13th door had not only given her food and shelter, it had given her hope. That night, as the fire burned low, Lyra whispered softly, "The others will remember tonight." Daniel nodded, his voice calm. "Let them remember. Let them see that one act of mercy is stronger than 100 acts of fear." The room fell into silence, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of a story that had only just begun, for in that moment, a human and an alien mother had changed something greater than themselves. The 13th door had not simply opened. It had taught a forgotten lesson, that mercy was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all, and from that night on, neither of their lives would ever be the same.